Noon and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a joy to see so many familiar faces again. My name is Maurizio Benazzo, but you heard it already 16 times.
My name is Zaya, and we're speaking today from the territory of coastal Miwok and southern Pomo people, also known as Sebastopol, California. This is day 16 of our journey together of learning and being in solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And today we're delighted to present Black
Palestinian solidarity,
panel.
resisting racism, colonialism, and apartheid. And we have with us Faith, that she will be hosting the panel. So I'm going to read a brief introduction of Faith, and then from there you will take it on and guide us into this journey.
Welcome,
Faith.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Let me read Faith. Faith Gay is an activist, a master's student at Princeton University with a background in an anti-war organizing and congressional advocacy. Her work focuses on democratizing United States foreign policy. She's a member of Black for Palestine, a collective organizing Black people in the US to leverage their political, economic, and cultural power in support of Palestinian liberation and to end the US complicity in Israeli apartheid. Thank you, Faith, for being here and for who you are and what you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zara and Maurizio. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I'm looking forward to us having a really lovely discussion, and I'm hoping everyone can come away learning something, reflecting on something, inspired to do something after our discussion. I'm really excited to be joined by Reverend Naomi and Imam Adeyinka, two people that just getting to know them through this panel and their stories. I'm really inspired by the work that they do. And yeah, so I will say we have an hour of discussion, and then the chat will be open for Q&A for the last 30 minutes. And we look forward to getting to your questions. Sand will be fielding them. If you submit them during this hour, I promise we will do our best to get to them at the end. But yes, looking forward to talking with everyone. So I am going to share a bit about myself, and then I'm going to allow our panelists to speak about themselves and about what brings them to this space and to this topic about Black-Palestinian solidarity. Personally, as our wonderful Sand host mentioned, I am a member of Black for Palestine, a group that works to mobilize Black people, particularly in the US, around the liberation of Palestine and particularly influencing US policy towards Palestine. But I came to that group in a really long journey. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I am a preacher's kid. I grew up in a church, a large Black church in Los Angeles, and grew up in a church that did Holy Land tours to Israel every year for a really long time, and I think still does them to a certain degree. And so grew up really wanting to go to Jerusalem someday and see like where Jesus walked and those sort of phrases. And also, you know, growing up in LA is home to one of the largest Jewish populations in the US, I think the second largest after New York, and particularly a population that has really close ties to Israel. And so I grew up with, you know, friends and classmates who had family in Israel, grew up with family friends who were donating to yeshivas in Israel. And so that was sort of the environment I grew up in. And then as I got older, went to school, was studying, you know, Black revolutionary leaders a bit more, became really fascinated with, in particular, the Black Panthers, which, you know, had a big presence in California. Was really fascinated by their steadfast sort of commitment to the liberation of Palestine and other oppressed peoples. And will also say, as a student of international relations, was really fascinated by the rhetoric in Washington about Israel as this key US ally and this sort of only democracy in the Middle East. And so I ended up going to Jerusalem, studying there for a semester in college, and then in Jordan, and was really moved by the segregation and the apartheid I saw. And that sort of put me on this path towards wanting to work closer with Palestinians, wanting to influence US policy against supporting apartheid. And it's shaped where we've ended up here today. And so that's me. That's how I got here. I'm going to let our other panelists introduce themselves, and then I'm also going to share a bit about Pastor Michael McBride, who couldn't be here with us today because of pneumonia. But I'll pass to Reverend Naomi and let her talk about her own journey and what she does.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Faith, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm really delighted. I'm a little under the weather, so I'm moving kind of slowly, but I'm delighted to be here. I am based in Philadelphia, Lenape land, and about 10 years ago, in 2014, I was in seminary. I was in graduate school preparing for ministry. That in and of itself was a surprise to me. I grew up in the historically Black church and was very active in my church, saw myself as a kind of professional church member, but didn't see myself in religious leadership, didn't see myself as a clergy person. But you know what? Everybody else did. My nickname in college was Reverend. I mean, there were all these signs apparently that were pointing to spiritual accompaniment, as I like to think of ministry. But it took me a while to get that memo. In 2014, I was in my second year of seminary at Lancaster Theological Seminary, and one of the things that we did in the second year of the Master of Divinity program was participate in a cross-cultural experience. That is, we were supposed to experience the Christian church in another context, in another geographic context. And the year that was my cross-cultural experience was the year that we went to Israel, Palestine. I didn't know that I grew up a Christian Zionist. We didn't have that. We didn't use those terms, but my experience is similar to Faith's in that my childhood church sent people to the Holy Land year over year, so that we could walk where Jesus walked. And these were very depoliticized conversations. We didn't think of the political context of Palestine. We didn't think of ourselves as being in solidarity with Palestine. And so all I knew going into this cross-cultural experience was what I grew up with, which was come and tour the land where Jesus walked. But I'm fortunate that before we actually went to Palestine in January of 2014, we had a whole semester of study about Palestinian resistance, about Israeli apartheid, and about the obligation that Christian communities in particular have to interrupt and eventually defeat the outsized role that Christian Zionism has played in determining U.S. foreign policy related to Palestine, and in general, determining U.S. attitudes toward Israel in general. So I felt prepared intellectually for what I was going to witness, but nothing could have prepared me for what I would psychically and emotionally and spiritually experience, existentially experience, being in Palestine for about 3 weeks in January of 2014. I recognized what I saw. I know segregation when I see it. I know, colorism and race-based oppression when I see it. I know when religion is used as a pretext for evil deeds. And at this point, we got to call a thing a thing. This is evil. And so that was my introduction to the Palestinian liberation movement. And since then, I have been involved most recently in the national leadership of a group called Christians for a Free Palestine. And I'm going to put some links in the chat because I hope that folks who are listening will get engaged in this work. We are trying to defeat Christian Zionism. We're trying to organize Christians in particular to understand the toxicity of Christian Zionism and then work to redeem, really, Christianity by fighting against policies that are grounded in Christian Zionism. So I'm just happy to be here today, and I'm excited for this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Naomi. So inspiring, and I really do hope you feel better. Seems we have a panel of people who are feeling a bit under the weather, but I know it's because y'all are working hard, and I hope you get some rest after this. Imam Adeyinka, would you like to introduce yourself?
Greetings of peace, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. And I do hope you feel better. My prayers for you, Reverend Naomi and Pastor Mike. Even though he's not physically with us, his spirit and his intention are absolutely present. I'm very thankful to be with you today. I am currently coming to you from the house of a Palestinian American family that are friends of mine, which is really meaningful to me. It wasn't planned this way, but God has his own plan. The Creator has its own plan. And I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Potawatomi Nation. And I think it's important that these indigenous tribal acknowledgements and land acknowledgements are made. And so I thank Reverend Naomi for doing that, especially in light of speaking about the occupation of Palestine. They're even more meaningful today. We must connect the dots. I am very privileged, I think, because as a 16-year-old going to high school in Houston, Texas, I applied thanks to the encouragement of a friend of mine who attended this program a year before me, the Mickey Leland Kibbutz internship program. And if you know a little bit about politics in the 80s and 90s, Mickey Leland was a congressman of the 19th Congressional District in Houston. He had visited the state of Israel and particularly the kibbutzim, these socialist communes, these experiments that were very instrumental in the occupation of Palestine. But he had a very powerful, very positive experience, and he wanted American high school students to have some share of that. And so he started this internship in partnership with the American Jewish Committee that would take 12 high school students to Palestine for 6 weeks. And I applied for the program. I was accepted. And so it was the summer of 1992, after my junior year. I was landed in Tel Aviv. And over 6 weeks, we were in Haifa. We were in Beersheba and the Negev Desert and Dimona and, of course, Old and New Jerusalem. And I went there very much like Faith and Reverend Naomi. I was not born or raised in a Muslim family. I was raised in a Baptist, Southern, Black Baptist church, partly. When I was in Nigeria, I went to a Nigerian Baptist church from the ages of 6 to 13. And when I went back to the United States with my parents, I was really entrenched in Black Christianity, and the Holy Land, has this place in our consciousness. And so I was going there not to learn about socialism, but to reconnect and to strengthen my Christian ties, my Christian roots. And like Reverend Naomi, it was very clear to me that the inequities, the inequalities, the injustice, the discrimination that I witnessed that was not really talked about. We had a very curated trip. We spent most of our time with Jewish families, but we also stayed with Arab families. We lived on a kibbutz for about 2 to 3 weeks, but we also had sessions with PLO members. The Palestinian Liberation Organization. So we were introduced to different perspectives, but it opened my eyes. And when I came back as a very naive 16-year-old, was asked to share my experience with the people who helped pay in part for my journey, I said, I think Israel is somewhat racist, and to the American Jewish Committee. And it's as if all the air in the room, it was just sucked out. And my poor mother, who was there as a guest, she just smiled and asked me later, did you think that was a wise thing to do? And I said, Mom, I was just sharing with them. I had no agenda. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was just, as an African American, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And so I saw that injustice. And that kind of began my engagement with the Palestinian struggle. And later on, after embracing Islam, a year later, actually, I went to work at a summer camp organized by the YWCA for Palestinian orphans who had lost fathers or uncles in the first Intifada. And so that was also eye-opening because I saw the other side. This was in Jordan, Amman, Jordan. And then as an Imam, I've been very privileged because the most Palestinians are Muslim. There is a very significant Christian minority. There's a Druze minority, as we all know. But yeah, I know. So I'm in conversation. I'm in relationship with Palestinians all the time because so many of them are in our community, and we are constantly working and praying. But of course, the last 8 months have been a departure from things as normal. So that's a little bit about me and my connection with this really important issue. And I'm very happy that SAND is spending time and resources and for Zaya and Marizio. I'm very thankful for the movie, the film that you have made with so many important voices. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Imam Adeyinka. And yes, I do want to take a moment and just acknowledge that, people in Gaza are still facing horrific, the most unimaginable conditions. And it's a privilege for us to be on here today and have internet and be able to host this event and to be able to go, to church or mosque or, prayers this weekend. And so we're sending our best wishes to those people. And I hope that people can come away from this feeling conviction about what we can do for Palestinian people in Gaza in particular, but also knowing that we're just keeping them in our prayers and in our hearts. I'm gonna read a bit about Pastor Michael McBride, who couldn't be here with us today. I think we did have a chance to speak with him earlier this week, and I think he had a very similar experience of going to Palestine and being, again, as Imam Adeyinka put it, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, seeing that experience. But in his general life, Pastor Mike is the executive director of Live for USA, which is an organization that, or maybe more of a network, a national organizing and social change network that works towards ending the criminalization of people of color, reducing gun violence, and transforming the policing and criminal justice system. Excuse me. He was named by the Center for American Progress as a top clergy leader in 2013, and he served on President Barack Obama's Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships Council to address poverty and inequality. He is one of the national leaders in the movement and to implement public health gun violence prevention programs. And he was recently featured as one of CNN's Champions of Change. He is the co-founder of Black Church PAC, which is an organization or a group of folks working to influence electing people who work towards, the betterment of Black people. And he's also a co-founder of the Black-Brown Peace Consortium. He serves as the lead pastor of the Way Church in Berkeley, California, and he's been a frequent contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, the Huffington Post, and many media outlets. So very accomplished man, hopefully resting and getting better. I hope folks will follow his work even after this conversation. I also just want to take a moment, knowing that we all come from Christian backgrounds somewhat, I did want to take a moment to share a link to a group called Black Christians for Palestine, which involves a very good friend of mine named Asmira Hamori Davis. And they are, as the name says, Black Christians for Palestine. And Asmira in particular, who I just shared that link, is the daughter of a Black man and a Palestinian woman and the granddaughter of a Nakba survivor from 48. And so I hope folks will also take time to hear about their organization experience. So hearing that we all had the similar experience of we got there and felt like we got to Palestine and felt like we could clearly see or recognize what was going on. I wonder if you both can talk a little bit specifically about what you were recognizing, what sort of experiences were you having that made you think, oh, this reminds me of segregation, or oh, this reminds me of apartheid, and how you came away from that. Does either one of you want to kick it off? I'm happy to. Or Reverend Naomi.
Well, I'm just trying to pick something. Pick a thing that, I mean, I was overwhelmed by the connections. The linkages between the colonial project that is the United States and the colonial project that is the State of Israel. Everything from surveillance to curtailing movement. I mean, it's very the mechanics or the tools of authoritarianism, of apartheid, have been shared by empires around the world throughout time. If you can curtail the movement of people, you can restrict where they can go, what they can see, what they can do. You invalidate their histories and their stories, right? You simply deny their dignity. We had a very politicized trip in that we were firmly standing tall in our solidarity with Palestinian people. And I'm grateful for the agenda of our trip, because again, I didn't know kind of what to expect. But we did spend some time with a settler at a settlement. And this man from Chicago, mind you, was telling us, to go back to the United States, this doesn't concern us. I mean, it was the unapologetic denial, wholesale denial of the humanity, of the creative and intellectual production of a people. I mean, it's textbook as far as I'm concerned. And this doesn't even speak of the kinds of physical forms of violence that we saw. The fact that our tour bus got shot at when we were in Ramallah. The fact that a soldier came onto the bus to just toy with us. I mean, there was no, it was it brought up for me kind of ancestral memory. Like, I don't have the actual memory of living through Jim Crow. I don't have the actual memory of my enslaved ancestors, but there's something that the trauma that has been generationally passed down was activated when I was in Palestine, right? Which is why I say I knew exactly what I was experiencing. There was a knowing in my body, regardless of my own lived experience. There was a knowing that this evil has been exported, has migrated, has been fully leveraged in other parts of the world. I taught, talked to children in refugee camps, who, and, I think one of the um, the features of apartheid, of oppression, of genocide is um, to, in some ways, parentify is not the word I want, but it's a denial of it's a denial that children are actually children. Like, children were treated like they were adults. Children were brutalized like they were adult. I mean, I'm not suggesting that adults should be brutalized in either, but there was this way that, and that has me thinking about the children in Birmingham, Alabama, or the children in Detroit, where I'm from originally, who get characterized as older than they are so that they can then be victimized as if they were adults. I mean, so there was just so much. There were so many dots I was connecting when I was there that seemed terrifyingly familiar to me.
Absolutely. And I hope you were able to find some peace or come away from that trip getting some help, because it is a mind trip, a bit. Pastor Adeyinka, excuse me, Imam Adeyinka, did you want to respond to that or speak about your own experience? If not, that's all right.
Yeah, what Reverend Naomi said really rings true for me as well. And as I mentioned, I first visited Palestine when I was 16 years old, and then again when I was 17. And then since 2019, I visited every year, and I take groups of Muslims, 40, 80 people to some of the holy sites. We go to Jerusalem, of course, primarily to the Muslim quarter, because even though our intention was to visit the Christian quarter, the Jewish quarter, the Armenian quarter, the presence, the military presence, the checkpoints, the way that the IDF soldiers humiliate and intimidate, again, brought up ancestral memories of how law enforcement officials here in the United States did, and some still do, the same exact thing. People who are supposed to protect and serve do the opposite. They attack and they exploit. And so we also take groups to Khalil, known as Hebron. And it's been rightly said, it's not an open prison, it's an open concentration camp. It's a place, when you go to inner city communities in the United States, Black communities in the United States, brown communities in the United States, and you see the intentional lack of investment in those communities. When I'm in Khalil, when I'm in Hebron, and I see that the shopkeepers are not allowed to sell their goods, where children are beaten in public for simply not following an order to walk in the opposite direction. It brought up so many, very recent events like the death of Trayvon Martin and just boys and girls, who have had their childhoods taken away from them as a result of the apartheid system that has remnants in our country and is very present, clear and present in the state of Israel. When I was younger, it was mostly seeing the differences in the socioeconomic conditions. Walking through a Jewish neighborhood, it's very clean, trash is being picked up, the sewage system is working, and then walking through a Palestinian neighborhood and seeing the dilapidated buildings and the trash on the streets and not witnessing the same amount of investment was something that was very telling to me. And then speaking to the Palestinian youth that were our hosts, speaking to the Arab youth that were our hosts, whose families were our hosts, and they shared stories, right? And the Jewish youth as well. Many of them were very progressive, very liberal, and they were not ignorant of the double standards that their government, was putting into practice, for the different communities. So I think it's very, very difficult for someone who's either experienced Jim Crow, experienced segregation, experienced discrimination, microaggressions, racial, ethnic microaggressions, to miss that, when they visit Palestine.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really amazing to know you're bringing people back to have witness to that experience.
Oh yeah, because and why do I bring people back? Because the Palestinians that we visit when we're there tell us to. They and this is kind of a departure from the BDS movement, from the movement to boycott, divest, and sanction, who even many Muslims among them discourage people from visiting Israel. But the Palestinians themselves, the oppressed people, request again and again, go back. They tell us, without exception, in my life, go back and tell our brothers and sisters in America, we want them to come. We want them to come see this for themselves, because once Christian Zionists, as Reverend Naomi mentioned, once American Muslims, once they become aware of what's happening, then policy will change. Policy will change once they become aware and take action. And then there are other more practical reasons. The shopkeepers in Palestinian neighborhoods don't get the same kind of support that their Jewish and Christian peers get from tourists. And so they want American Muslims to come to the Muslim quarter and support them economically. They are struggling, they are suffocating because they get offered millions of dollars for their land, millions of dollars for their shops that maybe are 5 by 5 square feet, because the Israeli government wants that land. And so they very much like to see Americans, and like I said, particularly American Muslims coming. And so that's a part of, and the only times we didn't go was during COVID, 2020, and then this past, this year.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, and I think it highlights the tension. I think there's a difference between being a tourist and coming to bear witness, you know? Like I'll say, I was a student at an Israeli university, and it was important for me to see, like, the university itself was a bus station. It had Palestinian, it was basically in East Jerusalem. The university itself was like a settlement, and they just wouldn't acknowledge that it was in East Jerusalem. So it had buses from East Jerusalem and the West Bank coming like in and out, and they were called the Arab buses because, and it made me realize Arab, like Palestinians and Israelis were riding separate buses. Or you know, that they were living in separate neighborhoods, and also going to separate schools. And you had, quite frankly, like people preferred it that way. They were like, no, we want our own bus systems and we want our own schools, particularly Israelis. And so that it like shaped my perspective. And then at the same time, I remember the school organized a trip to a kibbutz to give some of the international students, you know, a taste of the kibbutz and give them like the experience of visiting one. And we paid like $20 or something, some small like fee. And we went and visited this kibbutz. And all we knew about kibbutzes were like, oh, socialist living, farmers living in peace and in community with each other. And we get there, and they talked about all that. And then at one point we're walking, and they pointed at this like big building, and they were like, oh, this is our factory where we make weapons for the IDF. And that like helps sustain our income. And of course, no one from the school had told us, and the $20 we paid was going towards the kibbutz, right? Like they make their money also from tourism. But no one had told us we were paying money to people that help create weapons for the IDF, right? Like that wasn't disclosed. And it was, for me, I think I had shown up there thinking I was just going to learn about the conflict and learn about people. And I also had to sit with, I have no idea how my money is being used. And so I think there are like Palestinian shopkeepers, there are like Palestinian business owners that need the business and they need the money. They need folks coming to like see what they're going through, and not just for business purposes, but to see what like apartheid looks like.
Yeah.
But it's also like there's no way to avoid helping fund occupation. And so it's also like, how do you avoid that? Or how do you go and bear witness while also trying directing your money in very specific ways? And yeah, I do want to talk about, sorry, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. You know, when you mitigate supporting apartheid as much as you can. The groups that I've taken in, you know, since 2019, we're very intentional about only booking hotel reservations at Palestinian-owned hotels, for example. The restaurants we go to, you know, it takes a little more effort, but it's not difficult to support the Palestinian people that are there, Muslim and Christian, right? So there are ways to minimize how much you support the operation of apartheid, and I hope, you know, I do hope that people go there, because you have to see it for yourself, and it will hopefully launch, if you're not already active, it will launch people into action.
Yeah, I just want to chime in here on this point too. I mean, I think, you know, I left Palestine that first time keenly aware of my own compromised life, you know, that I needed to be honest about the way I rationalized these compromises. I mean, to Imam's point, there might not be a way to completely eliminate all of the contradictions. You know, I rail on about American politics even as I navigate them and try to make life for my daughter in a way that so but I think part of what allows this genocide, what allows these attitudes to continue to proliferate is an utter refusal, an arrogance about the extent to which we are negotiating all kinds of contradictions. And at least if we can be honest and work on refusing the contradictions that we can refuse, mitigating the ones that we can't fully refute. Palestine called me to a more honest living. And for that, I will be forever grateful to the Palestinian folk who said, now you can't unsee. You you can't unhear these stories, right? And so go and tell, go and tell, go and tell, go and tell. So yeah, I think this notion, I think a lot of people that I've spoken to, particularly over the past 8 months, are frozen in this zero sum, well, if I speak out about Palestine, that means I got to speak out about X, Y, and Z. Yeah, it does. Right? Because what this illuminates, right, is the utter contradictions, right? And so I think a lot of folk are afraid of the domino effect of the whole house of cards falling, right? And, I think it's very true that, I'm going to butcher the quote, but the saying that the question of Palestine is the question, right? This is the political and moral issue of our generation, because the what Palestine illuminates is a global kind of tendency toward racism, let's just call it, of theft, of plunder. This is the human legacy. It really is. And so I just wanted to chime in to say that yeah, I had to change not just around the issue of Palestine, but on so many different questions. I had to change my mind and change my practice, change my lifestyle because of what Palestine illuminated and activated for me.
Yeah, and thank you, Reverend Naomi. And I know we're spending time on this issue, but this particular point, I think it's time well spent. Just like, and I agree with you, the Palestinian issue is the defining issue of this generation. Just like Dr. Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois said, the problem of the color line, was the defining problem of the 20th century. And they are connected. White supremacy, which is really a manifestation of what Dr. Sherman Jackson calls white normalcy. The idea that white standards of beauty, white standards of humanity, of intelligence, of morality are superior to non-white standards of beauty, intelligence, political, economic systems. And we can say as a civilization, no, we don't subscribe to that. But when we look at our school curricula, what systems, what history, what narrative, what perspectives are centered, right? And so the contradictions are glaring. And what Palestine forces us to do is to really look at, I remember during the Black Lives Matter movement, when it had its second wave with the murder of George Floyd, the response to Black Lives Matter was all lives matter, right? And we saw the media coverage when Ukraine was invaded. We saw how people, had Ukrainian flags and on their profiles on Instagram and Facebook. And And those same people, when Gaza, when the numbers, 3,000 people murdered, 5,000, 10,000, many of those people weren't having, they did not put Palestinian flags in their profile. People getting doxxed and, fired from their jobs and lost scholarships, and they didn't graduate. Very different response. Why? If all lives matter. And the other thing I wanted to just shine a little light on is when I went to Palestine, I saw that the white supremacy was not only weaponized against Palestinian people, it was weaponized against Sephardic Jews, non-Ashkenazi Jews as well. They had to prove their Jewishness, whether they're Moroccan Jews or Ethiopian Jews. And I spoke to some of the Falashas who were there, and the Ethiopian Jews, and they told me, yeah, we're being treated like trash, like trash. And it's just interesting now because 30 years later, I see them in the IDF, right? You see Ethiopian Jews serving in the Israeli Defense Force. So I just think that yes, it's kind of the elephant in the room, white supremacy, and whether it's in New York or Mississippi or California or Palestine or South Africa or anywhere else, this is a common thread that's used to justify an imperialist project.
Thank you both. It is making me also reflect on, or like as we were acknowledging, right, like some of us coming from these Black Christian spaces that are still like Zionist, Christian Zionist spaces that are contributing to the occupation of Palestine. It's also making me think about as you were acknowledging Imam Adeyinka, right, like Arab Jews being complicit, right, in the oppression of Palestinians, of the United Arab Emirates, helping fund genocide in Sudan right now. And so like we have to acknowledge the contradictions. Even oppressed people can oppress other people, right? And we have to sit with, what is our actual responsibility or what are our values and what do we feel conviction about to what we think other human beings deserve. Even if it costs us, even if it means we're not in power, even if it feels vulnerable. And actually, Imam, I was hoping I could ask you a bit about, because you mentioned doing, solidarity work with Indigenous people. And, something I reflect on a lot, right, is like, as like African Americans, we didn't ask to be in this country, right? Brought here against our will. But, so much of our culture and history has been around trying to like gain ownership of things, trying to get land, trying to get some stake in the American financial system. And of course, Indigenous people are still in our country. They still are being oppressed and being occupied by the United States of America. And so I actually like to close that question to both of you, right? Like, what does it mean to stand in solidarity with Indigenous people? Like, what are our responsibilities or what values guide you to support that? And how do we not become oppressors, right? Even if we're here against our will, even if we've gone through historical trauma, which many Jewish people have, how do we not end up that way?
More and more, maybe it's the older I get, I don't know. I believe that healing is so central to resistance. Part of what the movie, I think, beautifully and powerfully declares is that, yes, even trauma is not a justifiable reason to enact, decades of occupation, decades of apartheid, and ultimately this genocide. That our bodies are keeping the score, and as long as we are not on a full-time basis seeking to transform the trauma, you know, and I'm not the person who thinks you can pray everything away. I, you know, I think that healing is the healing process is more substantive than that. I'm not knocking prayer. I'm just saying that so much of what the Christian church, and I'll say this, so much of what the Christian church has taught is that, you know, Jesus is the answer for all the questions you have. But actually, there's a deeply there's a deep kind of bankruptcy around recovery from trauma. Recovery is what keeps coming to my mind, right? As a framework. Like we all need to be in recovery from, you know, imperialist ways of thinking, ways of being, independent. I mean, we fly the flag with pride, independence, but what has that done to our ability to be community and be interdependent? So I just think that you know, so many are searching for political solutions, and we need to, you know, have the best policy people around the table who can negotiate the thing. But without steps toward deeper healing, that doesn't then project, where we then don't project our trauma onto others, where we're not living in existential fear all of the time, where we feel like we have no community. I mean, I walked away from Palestine ultimately enraged and also very sad. Like, in order for a people to behave this way, there has to be some deep, I'm sorry, are we cussing on this? I'm a cussing preacher. I'm sorry. There's got to be some deep shit. I there's I and Political solutions will not get us all the way there if we do not address the ways our bodies have been burdened by, taken on the burden of this residual trauma. So we need healers in our midst. And not people who just gonna lob scripture at you or lob, you know, but folks who really know how to get to the epigenetic, you know, help us get back into our bodies. You know, when we encountered the children who were IDF soldiers, I wanted to just be like, how you had to leave your body to do what you're doing right now. You can't be in your body and do this, you know. And so we need healers, and in our society, in the West, I think we despise our healers. We mock and ridicule our healers. We don't take healing seriously. And I think that's playing out on the world political stage right now.
I mean, you can be an IDF soldier or an SS Nazi or a, you know, police officer that's part of a police department that targets with the one we just heard about in Memphis, the goon squad, or what were they called? You know, that was going around targeting young Black men. And you can do that in your body if you've lost your soul. You know, if the heart is dead, if a person is not walking conscious of their spiritual reality. And I think healing, you know, is, and I agree with you, Reverend Naomi. I don't think we can pray away our problems. And I think a lot of times prayer is used as that opiate, you know, that Karl Marx had mentioned. And actually, he was not anti-religion. That statement he made about religion being the opiate of the masses, he wasn't really criticizing religion itself. He was being more prescriptive. He was being more descriptive of what happens in an industrial capitalist world when people don't have religion, right? that is not an escape from their problems, but is helping them to face their problems. So how do we pray for healing? How do we use our prayers to get guidance from Spirit on what is an appropriate action to remedy and rectify the wrongs and the injustices that we see around us in Palestine and in our own backyards, in our own cities, whether we're in Europe, whether we're in North America, South America, Africa, Asia. There's a verse, a passage in the Quran, which for Muslims is a summary. And it's important, I think, that I reference this because how I have learned about Islam is very different than the caricature of Muslims that you see in the mainstream media and mainstream academia. Muslims see the Quran as a summary of all the wisdom truths and wisdom traditions that have existed before and after it. And there's a passage in which God, the Creator, the absolute reality, there are many names for God. Olodumare and, Oloru and, and about to say the Creator says, indeed, the Creator commands to justice and spiritual excellence and generosity with your relatives, and condemns immorality, condemns indecency and oppression, and exhorts you that you take heed. This is in the 16th chapter of the Quran, verse 90, if you want to look it up for yourself. The 16th chapter, verse 90. So there's a spiritual imperative within the Muslim tradition that most Palestinians are very much aware of, right? And if you've been watching the videos on TikTok and on social media, that grandfather who was mourning his baby girl, his granddaughter, ruh ani ruh, right? What the resilience that we see, the faith that we see, the surrender, the vulnerability that we see is nourished by this tradition. Prophet Muhammad, God bless his soul, has a saying, whoever among you sees a wrong, and this is to answer your question, Faith, about how do we occupy time and space in solidarity with indigenous peoples here in Turtle Island, North America, right? Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said, whoever among you sees a wrong, an injustice, let them change it with their hands. Change it with your hands. You have to be in your body, as Reverend Naomi was saying, to do that, right? You have to have either been healed or be on the path of healing to do that. And then he said, if you're not able to change a wrong with your hands, then change it with your tongue. Change it with your words. And you can extend that to your pen, with communication. And then he said, and if you're not able to do that, to change a wrong to a right with your words, then he said, change it with your heart. Now, we're not used to that, right? I think the civil rights activists in the 60s, the 50s and the 60s, they understood that. How do you change something with your spirit? How do you use the power of spirit and faith to change material circumstances? And so all of those are different avenues available to us. And how the way I show up with indigenous brothers and sisters is, number one, to listen to them, to see them, to socialize with them, to hang out with them, to invite them to my home, to go to their lodges and their
Oh no, have we lost Imam Adeyinka?
He just froze for a moment.
He was saying such amazing things.
I was gonna say he was in the that was a sermon close right there.
Yeah. We might get him back.
He will come back.
He
most
probably
likely.
will leave and come back. Hopefully he will. If he
Okay.
hears us, please leave and come back. It will be the best way to regain bandwidth.
Got it. I know we're getting into Q&A time. I'll say one like final thing that again, Imam Adeyinka's sermon was inspiring me, and just that I'll drop the link to it, but you know what Imam Adeyinka was saying about, you know, righting a wrong and sort of acknowledging a change in your spirit and your heart was reminding me of watching a video of Ta-Nehisi Coates from late last year. And for those that don't know, Ta-Nehisi Coates, very famous writer from The Atlantic, wrote famously The Case for Reparations in The Atlantic. Imam Adeyinka, you're back with us. We were saying we caught you in such
we
great moment.
No, we just lost power for some reason. But I'm here. I'm on my phone.
Okay. I'll finish, and then if you want to finish your statement, please let me know.
No, I don't know the last thing you heard, but I had finished, so I'm not sure the last thing you heard. But go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, yes. So just Ta-Nehisi Coates, very famous writer. In The Case for Reparations, which was this major article he wrote, he actually included Israel as an example of justice for reparations, in the sense that Germany paid Israel reparations, billions of dollars, I believe, to pay for the Holocaust. And in this, he was at this Palestinian Festival of Literature, and he's talking with Michelle Alexander of the New Jim Crow, talking with Rashid Khalidi. I'm sorry, I don't know his first name. Very famous Palestinian professor who's written on the Nakba and on apartheid. And he talked about his conviction about writing about Israel without having visited. He hadn't gone, he hadn't seen, he hadn't bear witness, and he had sort of justified, you know, Israel's existence of them receiving this money and all of it, and then not really known anything about how the country operated, about certainly not about like how those reparations have often like not served Holocaust survivors living in Israel, right? And so he talked about Palestinians telling him, share your story, right? Like, you did this thing and now you need to change path and sort of correct. And the best thing you can do is come back to the United States and say something, right? And he was like, I can't have gone and not said anything. And so I think we're all on a journey of learning, you know, what we can do, and learning, like, we're not arriving as people with perfect politics, right? And so it's a matter of like, how do you stay on that journey of doing what you can to help others, of acknowledging changes in your spirit and your morals, and being effective, and like letting your faith compel you to action of some sort. And I think Pastor Mike isn't here with us today, but I think one of the greatest things his organization, the Black Church PAC, has done, right, is you know, they organized 1,000 Black pastors to come out in support of the ceasefire. And to put pressure on the Biden administration, right? The Biden administration is counting on Black votes come November. It is counting on Black people getting Joe Biden elected. And those people have made it, you know, Black pastors across the country have made it very clear, excuse me, that they don't want to be taken for granted, right? And they certainly don't want, they want the administration to have some consistency about its rhetoric around, you know, equality for Black people as well as equality for Palestinians. And so again, they can't stop the bombs going away, but they can put pressure. And so it's on all of us to do what we can. And whether it's, you know, your pen, your voice, you know, protesting, whatever it is. And so acknowledging that, I do want to save time for Q&A. We do have a couple of questions. in Q&A, if the chat, I don't know if the chat is open again, but if it is, you're also welcome to submit via chat. But I see one question from Don about asking speakers if they could share encouraging stories of Americans like getting it and waking up to the oppression of occupation of Palestine. And Don says that they lived in Jerusalem and Bethlehem for 3 years and are an advocate for Palestine. And they could just use some story of tipping points for people since it often feels like a really slow awakening. And so what are some channels of awakening that y'all have seen?
You know, I was thinking about this question, Don, when you first put it in the Q&A. I've been thinking about it since. You know, there's something encouraging and reinvigorating about collective disobedience, collective dissent. My mentor and spiritual director calls it dissident discipleship. We, in April of this past year, just this past April, Christians for a Free Palestine went to DC to take over the Senate cafeteria. We were saying, you know, Senate doesn't get to eat as long as Gaza doesn't eat. I mean, that was kind of the, and there was something about being there together. I mean, people didn't have, you know, as Faith said, people didn't have their politics perfect, and, you know, people didn't really know, and they were showing up, and people have been to Palestine, and some people haven't, and some people, but there was something about the energy we felt in our collective refusal, in our no, not on our watch. Now, will this one action be the action that ultimately brings about the ceasefire? We couldn't know that. No. But that one action for those 65 people who submitted themselves to be harassed, arrested, otherwise abused by the state, transformative, life-changing. And so my sense is that if we can just collectively resist, there's something enlivening about not being the only one to say no, hell no, you know, and singing together. And like I said, I wasn't alive during Jim Crow. I hear my family members tell me stories about, you know, going to the protest and singing before the protest, and that there was a wisdom, there was a logic to that, right? We're going to sing these songs together, and we're going to chant together before we go out and face the violence of empire, because in so doing, we get the courage that we don't normally have access to. And so I think action is our only way there. You know, I think we have intellectualized this for far too long. People think they need to read the right article or the right book or be in the right class and have the right teacher. And it's like, I find that to be a delay of justice when we try to overthink, overanalyze our way to wrong is wrong. I don't need to see how many videos do I need to see? Right? Wrong is wrong. And I just want to stand with some other people who are declaring that wrong is wrong. And in our walk, we make the road by walking, right? In our walking, we are healed. In our doing, we are healed. One of my favorite, I'll say this and then I'll stop. Two of my favorite passages in the Christian Bible. One is when Jesus heals 10 lepers, and he sends them to go show themselves to the priest. He touches them and then sends them. And the text says that as they went, they were healed. I just think that that's so interesting, right? It wasn't kind of an instantaneous, like, bam, I'm healed. It was like, as you walk, as you take that next faithful step, in your walking, in your acting, you are healed, right? So I think action is the way there. And then the second, one of my favorite passages is this passage Jesus tells about, story Jesus tells about this widow who goes to this judge. And this judge has the power to make her whole again. She's a vulnerable person in the context of her society, and the judge has the power to make it right. But the judge doesn't give a damn about this woman. But the woman keeps coming back and finally wears down the judge, such that the judge says, my heart isn't moved. I don't really care about you still, but I'm so annoyed by your persistence. I'm going to give you what you have asked me for, right? I don't know that we can change all the hearts and minds. I just want to wear the system down. And maybe that's a bad thing for me to say as a minister, because I'm supposed to be interested in hearts and minds and all of it. And I am interested, but I also think that we have the power to simply exhaust the system, wear it down, whether it ultimately respects, loves us or not. It is something that can be worn down, right? And so I believe that that's how we get people transformed. We put them in a situation where we can just wear down the system together. And in our action, we are healed and transformed. Right? I'm that's what I'm hanging my hat on today.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I agree. I think that's an important tactic and strategy. And to be successful, I think we have to have a multi-tiered, multi-pronged strategy of attaining the goal of justice for all. July 4th is around the corner. Life, liberty, and justice for all people, not just here in North America, but in Palestine and beyond. For the Uyghurs and for people in the Congo and Sudan and Yemen. I would like to add that one of the I guess you would call it ways of addressing social transformation that I've been made privy to through my teachers is something called the initiatory way to peace. And it was developed by one of my spiritual teachers, Sheikh Ali Indo, who passed away, God bless his soul, 3 years ago. He was from Senegal. He was a math professor who became a Sufi sheikh. And his legacy of working on the ground with, poor communities, oppressed communities, disenfranchised communities, not only in Senegal, but in South Africa, in France, in Mauritius, in LA, Los Angeles, was this work that he called the initiatory way to peace. And what it is in summary is it was his study and embodying. I really love that Reverend Naomi centered being in our bodies, his embodiment of the paths of people he called the great peacemakers. And so he identified 17 people who lived in different times in history, different religions, different ethnic backgrounds, people like Nelson Mandela, people like Ahmadou Bamba, Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, people like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, William Penn, and so on and so forth. And he noticed that each of them had something in common. They all went through 12 stages of transformation on their path. For example, Gandhi is one of the people that he looked at on their path from becoming someone who was just focused on their professional success and paying the bills, taking care of their families, to someone in Gandhi's case who led a movement against the British Empire. So how did Dr. King go from just being a theologian and the son of a Baptist preacher, at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, to becoming this leader of a movement? How did Rosa Parks make the transformation from being a seamstress to being this activist who was, and this is lost. No, most of the times we don't hear this. She was trained at the Highlander Center in Tennessee, along with Dr. King, along with Reverend Abernathy, right? She just wasn't a seamstress who was tired. She had training. And so this this initial way to peace is a training in how to become a peacemaker. And it's really important when we talk about healing, because what I've learned from going through the training myself and sharing it with a number of communities around the world is that a lot of the oppression that we see from the state of Israel is a result of unresolved trauma of their own. It's a result of their own demons. And so that reparation money is not used to bring about an equitable society, a democratic society, but rather it's used to perpetuate the atrocities that were done to them. And so this is a cycle that can't stop with deep healing.
Yeah, that's so important to acknowledge. And I think you've actually answered a question in the chat. Incidentally, someone was asking, why, the progressive Jews that are in Palestine and Israel are still in the minority, and, what can be done to increase, their numbers. And I think you hit it nail on the head, right? Like, it's unresolved trauma. And it's not going to be resolved, or it's not going to change until people heal, or until people, I think, can also be honest about how power corrupts, right? And what is there a world, how do we live in a world where, like, seeking power isn't the goal? Power over human beings isn't the goal, isn't what motivates and compels us. And being able to separate that from, like, having security and safety and wanting that, without, threatening that towards other people. There is another question in the chat about, what y'all were talking about coloniality and white supremacy, and, Peggy, I'm sorry, I don't think I can pronounce your name right, so I'm not going to butcher it, but Peggy was asking in the Q&A, noting that Palestine is the issue of this generation, and the contradictions of coloniality and white hegemony, right? Like, how do we view and compare what's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Sudan with Palestine, right? Like, is it different? Is what's happening in Palestine different from other genocides? Is our responsibility different? And I would also add in Haiti there. I don't think we can forget what's currently happening in Haiti, where the US and other Western countries, and Kenya, an African country, are organizing, an invasion and the oppression of Haitians against, their will and what they would like to see. And I'm also going to drop, Black for Palestine did a webinar on Haiti and Palestine, and what our thoughts are on how we stand in solidarity with both peoples. But I'd love for either of you to speak to that point, right? Like, how is Palestine different from the other genocides we're seeing, and what should our responsibilities be towards helping people in those places? I acknowledge that's a big question. If folks need to pass on it, if they don't have full thoughts on it, that's also all right.
No, I was just waiting for Reverend Naomi to go ahead and get us.
I went first last time. You go ahead.
Well, I think it's I love the question, and I think that these are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking. And I think the film that the film that it focuses on Palestine, but it also connects dots for us, especially when Dr. Gabor Mate, speaks about finding meaning, in suffering, right? Finding meaning in trauma, and the importance of solidarity and witnessing people, regardless of where they are, or what the color of their skin is, or what their religion or lack of religion may be. We are human beings, right? We are human beings, and we have a common shared inheritance. And so I think that what we see in the DRC and what we see in Sudan is very similar to what we see in Palestine and Palestine, which is that you have a state that is weaponizing its resources, its political processes, to exterminate a population, to erase the history of a population. As Reverend Naomi had said earlier during the session, and that's why when I watch what DeSantis is doing in Florida, and outlawing certain parts of African American history that are uncomfortable to white people. Like, what do you mean? And so what about the aspects of white history that are uncomfortable to African Americans and to indigenous Americans and to Asian Americans? If we don't, we all know the common truth that if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. But this is something that you will see. You'll see it before the genocide in Rwanda. You'll see it in Nazi Germany. The erasure of history is something that's a common thread. So I think you see common tactics. The underlying motivation, Peggy, I think is different in each context. Right? The historical legacy that underlies each of the places that you mentioned is different, right? But injustice is injustice wherever it is, so I think we have a common responsibility to speak out. And yes, I know this is exhausting. Activism is exhausting. Learning about each conflict and its historical roots is exhausting, and divestment and boycotting and civil disobedience, and they take a toll. And that's why, number one, having a spiritual center is so important. Having a rootedness in a faith tradition and a spiritual tradition is extremely important. Not only because it sustains you to do the work, right? Not to pray away the problem, but to do the work. The prayer should be, filling your tank so you can get into the trenches, right? But not only that, what I found, because I teach people a form of meditation that my teachers call social meditation, or how do you bring about enlightenment on how to respond to injustice. And what you'll find is that not each and every one of us is supposed to respond to every conflict. Like, you have a particular story, you have particular gifts and tools that make you most suited to respond to, let's say, police violence in Atlanta, Georgia, or to the environmental injustice that's going on in a particular part of the world, or the centuries-long destabilizing of Haiti, right? That's been going on since the 1800s. And so I don't think we all need to be active in each struggle, you should you should let spirit guide you to where you can be of most benefit.
I would just only add to that, I think we have a responsibility to bear witness in whatever ways we can. So if that is, recovering some of this history that is swept under the rug to understand the origin stories of some of these conflicts, some of this violence, or whether that, we have a responsibility to know what the hell's going on. But we live, I think, in a context where it's much easier and much more rewarding. Like we reward, naivete and, head in sand and, and so, I think that the lowest hanging fruit really is to bear witness to the struggles of humanity, to look when everyone else is looking away, right? To be the person in the room who, is going to introduce the topic at the dinner table. And so your family knows you coming, right? I'm that person in my family. My family knows I'm coming. And so part of the Thanksgiving conversation is going to be about world events. They just know that that's because, I'm reminded of the prophet Jeremiah talking about the compulsion, the fire shut up in his bones, right? Like, I want to live a life that gives me no choice but to speak. Even as my knees knock, even as people walk away from me, even as I get put on list after list after list. Like my prayer for us is that we might all be so consumed with the fire for justice that we have no choice but to speak. And if we can collectivize the risk of speaking, right, then I'm not just shouldering that risk alone. I'm shouldering it with other people, right? That's what organizing is. It's collectivizing the risk, right? We see the collective pain, and we collectivize the risk of saying no, of refusing. And so if we can just be committed to being the person in your friend group, in your congregation, in your family, who's going to bear witness and then speak about what you've seen, what you've read, right? That changes the energy. That changes the energy. So, I'm hopeful. I think we are at this pivotal moment in human history, right? I really do. And I hope that the momentum of this moment will compel folk who have been on the sidelines to actually get in the game, And this is not an individual sport, right? This is a team sport. And so find your position. I love what Imam Adeyinka is saying about finding your lane, finding your struggle, finding your corner of the work, right? It's too much for anyone to take on, but we can find our corner, we can find our piece, and we can do it together.
Thank you both so much. I know we're a little over time, so I'm gonna close this out a bit, but I do hope that folks feel like they can take on their own little corner, whether it is organizing your faith organization, whether it is organizing your own families. I think sometimes we forget we have to influence our own families and communities, our neighbors, and trying to spear them towards justice and wanting that for all people, whether it's at your workplace, whatever it may be, I do hope that folks take that to heart and know that you're not powerless. We can't believe that if we want things to change. And so you're also welcome to reach out. You should not feel like you can't ask these questions, or that you can't reach out to people and ask what doing that in your sphere looks like. Promise that's available. I promise there are people who will help you. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you in particular to Imam Adeyinka and Reverend Naomi for making the time. And do you have any final remarks or things you want to say? This waiting game.
We are
I
afflicted
was
in
raised
every way.
I was raised in the South. I was raised in the
Really?
South. Ladies first, you know? So,
Well, I'll just quote one of my favorite, but I get, I've quoted more scripture on this call than I normally do. Let me just that tickles me. We are afflicted in every way, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but we are not driven to despair. And we are persecuted, but we are not forsaken. We are struck down. Palestinians are struck down, but not destroyed. Absolutely. Right? Like, we're still here. Palestine is still here. And Palestine will be free.
Absolutely.
Amen.
I mean, in our lifetimes. I mean, in our lifetimes. In our lifetimes. And my closing remarks are first of all, thank you, Saya, Maurizio, Faith, Lisa, this whole team at SAND for producing this, for organizing this panel, and then, of course, for producing this film that I believe will open hearts and minds, and will send ripples around the world, and will compel people to action. Thank you for Reverend Naomi for speaking so eloquently and powerfully and brilliantly to this issue. And I look forward to, getting to know you better and following your work and learning from you. And I want to say, I guess two things. I was speaking to two elected officials locally where I live. Myself and a group of Muslims were speaking to them about passing a resolution calling for a ceasefire. And one of the things that I noticed is that there was this assumption that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has been going on for thousands of years. And, what can we do? These Arabs and Jews just fight each other, like religious people always do, which is another lie, right? Most wars in human history have not been fought for religion. Usually it's political and economic elites using religion, right, to mask their agenda. This conflict is less than 150 years old. Jews, Christians, Muslims have been living in peace for over 1,000 years in different parts of the world. When you study the legacy of Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus, before King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella and the Spanish Inquisition, when you study the Ottoman Empire, and when you look at Jewish communities in Iran and Iraq and in Egypt and Syria, where I studied, the reason why there's still Jewish populations in those places is because they were not massacred. And in Palestine, the same thing goes. There have been Jews and Muslims and Christians and Druze living together in harmony for hundreds of years in Palestine. And so don't feel overwhelmed by history, by bad history. This is not a problem that is perennial. It can be solved if we each play our part. And there's a lot of work to do. If each and every one of us does a little bit, we can do this. Like Reverend Naomi said, you don't have to do everything. And so being in community is extremely important. Being strategic, being spiritual, taking your faith with you, taking your spiritual practice into the struggle with you is what I'll always advise. So thank you again for inviting me. And thank you. Please watch the movie. Please host a screening. I plan to host a screening for my community in Houston, Texas. And just spread the message of this movie. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you to Lisa and the SAN team. Zaya and Maurizio, did you have any remarks you wanted to make?
Inshallah. Thank you. I mean, you open my heart. My heart is feeling that fire, Rev Naomi, that we all need to ignite and let that lead us and to the right action. And
both of you guys is like
Adeyinka, and thank you, Faith, for this beautiful, heart-opening conversation and truth-telling space you've created for us.
Yeah. This is spiritual work. This is not politics. We are not facing a political crisis. They make it political because they have a lot of money that they are sucking up out of this. It's spiritual work, and we have to get together, all these people. We all claim to be spiritual. On our way to yoga, we should think about this.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous, this kind of, that's not for me. You guys, both of you, you presented so clearly, so, and I can't stop praising the two of you. You just made a little in the corner of my mind. The three of you, Faith, you like are powerhouse in the making, I can tell you that. But there is a little corner in my mind where I keep my heroes, and you got a little spot there with the best of them. So thank you. Stay in touch. We're gonna be together.
Keep the fire together. Continue this.
Thank you, new family members.
Stand. And we have a long list of resources. Please check on our website. At this very moment, we encourage you to support grassroots organizations in Gaza, Palestinian organization. We have a list. Please choose and visit Palestine.
Yes.
That's however you can, please visit. It changes. Once you see it,
you cannot. And the second best thing to visit Palestine is to watch a movie. I hate to say this, it can be at zero. It's not for the money. Watch it for free. We don't care. Send it to your friend, because it's the second best thing. When you're there, as both of you said, what three of you said, it takes 10 minutes to realize that something is really wrong. You cannot accept this. So thank you.
And tomorrow we just confirmed we're going to have a conversation with the Gazan poet Musab Abduhoa. So please join us. This will be another very powerful conversation, followed by a poetry of the martyred poets in Gaza. So join us tomorrow, Sunday, the same time.
Same time, same place.
Deep gratitude for all of you.
And all of you, our community. It's an honor and a joy to have you every day with us, or even if you come in and out, it's still an honor to have you today with us. We love you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Reverend Naomi, thank you, Imam.
Thank you. Peace be with you all. Peace, love, and blessings.
And thank you, Faith, for holding the space so.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great.
Flawlessly. Thank you.